Hi, everybody. My name is TT. TT Windick. I'm part of Pearson Affordable Learning Fund. We're a global education fund, corporate venturing by Pearson. We cover emerging markets from Africa to India and Southeast Asia. I'm very excited to welcome you, our esteemed panelists today. As Benjamin mentioned, we're focused on just comparing and contrasting the global perspective as an investor that covers multiple markets. So upcoming here, we have, everyone can just join me so I can see, I don't know which order we're coming in as. So there's Vineet from Learn Capital. I feel like this is an award ceremony. Hi. Hi, Vineet. Next is Sveta. Hi. This is Sveta. She's from Loomis Partners. She's vice principal there. And then finally, we have our last investor, Nathan, from Nesta Impact Investments. So I think we'll just let everybody just settle in for the next minute before we start. Well, in the meantime, thank you, everybody, for joining this early. Our entire investment group just basically traveled here, all the way from Surrey, India, and the Bay Area. So to begin with here, I would like to just make introductions. I guess from Vineet onwards, you can just give a brief introduction of yourself and the scope of your fund, your activities, and then Will can go from there.
Yeah, that sounds good. So it's a pleasure to have everyone here. And TT, thank you for moderating this great panel. And thank you, Benjamin, as well, for all the work that he's done to plan this amazing conference. So my name is Vinit. I'm currently on the investment team at Learn Capital. So we are an early stage venture capital fund based out of San Mateo in the Bay Area in the United States. We are fairly agnostic in the way that we invest. So we define education technology incredibly broadly. Includes early childhood, K-12, higher education, employability, and continuing and lifelong learning. Sweet spot right now are Series A, Series B investments, but historically we've actually invested across the board. So I was telling some of the other panelists here, we've written checks as low as $25,000 and checks as high in the double-digit millions. We understand that this space is very nascent right now, and we're just trying to find the best possible commercial opportunities in education technology with the potential for transformative impact. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Shweta. I am part of the investment team for Loomis Partners. We are an investment fund based out of India, but our focus is across the US as well as India. We do early stage in specific themes, as well as growth stage capital. So our sweet spot is anywhere from as low as $2 million all the way up to 20 to 25. The areas we focus on are human capital, within which education technology and HR tech sort of sit within that. And then we also have focus area within AI, industrial IoT, and supply chain. We typically get very hands-on and involved with our investments, so you would normally not see the ratio of more than 2 companies per investment manager. And we don't have any sort of timeline within which we need to exit. So we're very patient with our investments, and I guess you sort of need to be, especially for the ones that are based out of India, given that the market is not as exitable as the Silicon Valley. So pleasure to be here and be part of this panel.
So I'm Nathan Elstubb. I am CIO of an organization here in the UK called Nesta, which is an innovation foundation. And one of the ways that we support disruptive innovation that is tackling social challenges is to run an impact investment fund. So we are effectively a double bottom line VC looking for financial and social return. We've been investing in EdTech for about 5 years now, so we're a little bit of a new kid on the block compared to some of these guys. And we run a relatively small fund, about £20 million, doing seed to Series A investments. And we've got 9 investees in EdTech businesses at the moment.
Well, it's really great to be joined by my fellow colleagues here. We come across a lot with Learning Capital, et cetera, in India and these markets. Just mentioned earlier to the people who just joined here, the fund that I'm part of, Pearson Affordable Learning Fund, also participates in similar activities, investing in Series A and plus in emerging markets, education businesses across the spectrum from early childhood to lifelong learning and online universities, for instance. So I just like switch this to more like to understand your personal journeys. Everyone here in this group this is a great convergence of people who are very passionate about education. Personally, my journey is that I came from a low-income family in Thailand. I was born and raised there and got a scholarship to go to amazing universities in the States. And sort of that propelled me into this investing in a global market and trying to provide more affordable low-income solutions at a high quality. So I would like to ask about your personal journeys and what made you interested in investing in education.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start. So I actually launched my career as a teacher. I graduated from University of California, Berkeley, and I always just thought back to my teachers in high school, and it was actually my high school economics teacher who really inspired me to major in econ when I got to college, and so I got really caught up in the idea of becoming a teacher after graduating, and so I taught 9th grade Algebra 1 in South Central Los Angeles for 2 years through the Teach for America program. If anyone is aware, it's a kind of an affiliate of Teach for All, which is the broader global network. And when I was in the classroom, Teach for America is a very data-driven, rigorous organization. So every teacher who joins the Teach for America program, they constantly have to reflect on their practice, right? And so I would always look into what are the common traits, mindsets of the absolute best teachers. And the one common theme that I noticed of all the best teachers is that they were effectively innovators at heart. They would do things in their classroom that were by no means considered to be conventional. And so I really got caught up in this idea of like innovation from the teaching perspective. And I started researching like design thinking, and IDEO had put out this wonderful design thinking for educators toolkit that I started using. And so I actually joined Teach for America's corporate staff afterwards, and I ran a team at TFA called the Social Entrepreneurship Initiative, where we supported alumni in launching new education ventures. As I ran that team, I just started to reflect more and more on where I thought I would fit best within this innovation ecosystem. And just given, like I said, how nascent the education technology industry still is, I love the idea of being able to drive the industry, right? Find the best people and ideas to drive the most impact globally. So that's just a bit about my personal story.
So education has been a very sort of personal area for me because I benefited from going to some of the top universities early on and sort of realized that the reason why I am able to make an impact in sort of the work that I do is because of the kind of education I've had. So when I moved back to India, back in 2014, I was sort of trying to think about things that I could do that would genuinely change the course of the next generation for the country. And given that we have 1.2 billion people and almost 60% of them sort of fall in the 25 to 38 age bracket, I think just the whole professional education space seemed really attractive. Whatever little work that you do could genuinely change the course of where the country ends up. So that was, I guess, the main reason why I sort of took up this opportunity at Loomis. And I guess the second sort of reason would be that India is still evolving. The country has a lot of potential. And if you think about where the middle class income sort of gets distributed, 70 to 80% of that typically in a middle income household gets channeled towards education. And people are willing to pay whatever they need to educate the child. That sort of is the psychology of the entire country because that's their only hope to get out of their current status quo. So that sort of makes it a really good dynamic as a market where people are willing to spend absolutely abnormal amounts for access to quality education, but we don't normally have that. And so the way technology has changed that for the country, especially with internet connectivity becoming really popular and being present in even the smaller towns, I personally feel that education is at that cusp where things could really change considerably. So those are the two main reasons.
So, different journey for me. Very long time ago, I used to be an engineer. I used to design jet engines, or at least bits of jet engines. And when they got too exciting for me, I decided I better become an accountant and calm down. But I always had an interest in business, and I started doing venture investing in the mid-90s, so nearly 20 years of venture investing experience now. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was growing increasingly frustrated that despite societal developments, technology developments, inequality and disadvantage was just something that even in developed countries was deeply entrenched, and nothing was changing around it. And so I thought I'd see if I could find opportunities to use investment as a tool to address the challenges of inequality and disadvantage. And as has been sort of noted here, when you look at many of the deep and costly challenges that society faces at the moment around problems of employment, criminal behavior, homelessness, substance abuse, things like that. Actually, education is a really powerful tool in helping addressing some of the root causes that lead people into some of these sort of situations. And so for me, it was a very obvious thing for us as an impact investor to focus on transforming education.
Thank you. So for the first part of this Q&A, we're basically going to focus on the global perspective, since we're just going to take advantage of the fact that we are exposed to so many different geographies. So it would be a compare and contrast for the benefit of the audience. So the first part of this is essentially, in the regions in which you are actively involved in as an investor, how would you compare and contrast the businesses and the successes of the companies that you come across as opposed to other markets? Can start with Nathan.
So fundamentally, the educational challenge is the same anyway. We're all trying to learn ultimately the same stuff, although, of course, we have questions about what the right curriculum is and sometimes about pedagogy and stuff like that. But for me, the thing that I see in our investee companies, which are typically pretty early stage, that is the real differentiator. Challenges of channel. How we actually get out and engage with markets, which vary country to country. Are you talking directly to educators? Are you talking to schools? Are you talking to regions or systems? So the primary differentiation that I see fundamentally across geography at the moment isn't really about education. It's not really about content. I mean, you can localize stuff relatively easily. It's more about the actual distribution challenges that we face, I think.
I think for India, the main challenges that any education business sort of goes through is obviously distribution, but also how do they build a brand without having to spend millions of dollars in advertising. So if you think about India as a geography, you obviously have some of the top sort of concentrations of population in the top 3 or 4 cities. And then the rest is very fragmented. So if you're a new age education technology company trying to disrupt the usual face-to-face classroom sort of format, you have to figure out how to develop that brand relatively quickly, because it's a market where perception matters a lot. And in general, education perception matters a lot. And that's why you have institutions that have built their brand and credibility over 100 years, which, frankly, it's going to be very difficult to displace those. So when I think of education technology, I think the big differentiator that I'm looking for when I'm investing in a business is how do they think about catching up with, so to speak, the 100-year gap that they have versus the traditional institutions that are out there, and getting the audience that they want to reach out to know about them, and also understand that this is quality education that they're getting access to.
So I would say the United States is actually in a pretty interesting place right now, and I would bifurcate this from both edtech companies that are pursuing B2B or B2I models, and edtech companies that are pursuing B2C models. So when it comes to the B2B world, I was actually just on the phone the other day with the Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Public Schools, and the first thing she said when I hopped on the phone with her was, I am just getting bombarded right now by so many different vendors who are trying to sell different point solutions to me. So there is now, in the United States, there is now a point solution, an EdTech point solution for literally every single use case you could possibly imagine. And every single school and every single school district is just getting flooded with all of these new EdTech products, right? And schools and districts aren't really in a place yet where they can effectively evaluate these or understand what the impact is going to be on students who go to those schools or districts. And so the biggest challenge that they face right now is just understanding, what is the confluence of all the technology that I'm using? How does that create a cohesive experience for students that kind of drives outcomes in a meaningful way? On the B2C side, so I've been in kind of the education innovation world, since back in like 2010, and that's, when I was a teacher, products like Remind and ClassDojo and Edmodo, companies with like very high organic growth were just coming up, right? And now we're in a place where if you are a B2C company in the United States, from our perspective as a VC fund, we're now looking for defensible business models from the outset. Right? So a lot of these kind of very high organic growth companies are now running experiments, and some of them are very effective experiments, but they're running experiments right now on their business models to see what is going to stick and what's going to become sustainable. But that's kind of the big challenge, I think, for B2C companies right now, is that if you are looking for external funding, can you communicate a defensible business model from the outset?
So I would like to actually put the two of you in opposition. So one of the biggest things that we've seen in the past 2-3 years is that a lot of US-based companies and EdTech companies raising funds for international expansion. So you see Skillshare's a company I was at previously raising rounds, Udacity, Coursera, et cetera, doing essentially effectively trying to gain international market share. You mentioned that localization seems to be relatively easy. I would want to, Vinny, to first address how would you rate the execution of companies looking to expand internationally, whether they've actually managed to do that effectively?
Yeah, so I think on the whole, a lot of the B2B or B2I companies that we've seen in the United States, a lot of them haven't even tried. I mean, a lot of them haven't even experimented with expanding internationally, and I think that's for a lot of different reasons. I think a lot of these entrepreneurs are very savvy, very smart people, and so they understand that in order for me to start engaging in any kind of international market, there needs to be a level of cultural competence that my team might not have at the moment, right? And a lot of US entrepreneurs still see the US market as a blue ocean opportunity, right? So it's so funny seeing this almost cognitive dissonance where schools and districts are like, stop bothering me, I have enough tools to evaluate. And entrepreneurs who are selling into schools and districts, they're saying, well, I have more schools and districts that I can sell them to in the United States, right? So, it probably doesn't make sense for me at the moment to invest additional resources or capital in trying to expand in an international market. And just to give you an example of one of our portfolio companies where it was just serendipitous. So one of our portfolio companies is called Genius Plaza. They're based out of Albany, New York, and they have a kind of multicultural content platform. And a lot of team members are actually from Latin America. Right, so that was a case where they didn't necessarily need to invest in cultural competence to expand into international markets. They had grown up in these markets. They had gone to school in these markets. And so as a result, they were able to run very effective pilots in Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Bolivia, very effective pilots in partnership with the governments, just because they had that cultural competence from the outset.
So I think there's probably a geographical split here, and I agree. We don't see an awful lot of particularly smaller US companies head-to-head when we're actually working with our investee companies. But I guess, because of the stage of organisations we're backing, they tend to have revenue at the moment between £1 million and £5 million. So, pretty early stage organisations. And with at least a third of those, they're generating more than 50% of their income from other geographies. So a lot from the States. A lot of UK-based businesses are going over and selling in the States quite effectively, but also into Asia, into Africa, and some of these other geographies. So, I think if you're in a small market, you have to look elsewhere and you have to find ways of broadening your market potential.
That's one of the key principles of our fund is that we invest in local entrepreneurs in each market to basically de-risk this cultural knowledge and know-how. Basically, a lot of business models could be ported out, but the proper localization and execution really matters with the local teams, whether it's a management team or the rest of the company. Our thesis is that we would love to back mostly local entrepreneurs. So Sveta, have you seen examples of companies, whether they're Indian-based looking to expand internationally or external companies looking to come into India that's managed to successfully expand and cross borders?
So yeah, so there are good examples of both. There are companies in India that typically do training for certain IT programs or for certain technologies that have evolved and captured a large chunk of the US market. There are also examples of US companies looking to come to India. We obviously have Udacity, Coursera. So everyone's actually present in India as well. So I feel that for companies to succeed in whichever market that they're trying to target, localization is definitely critical. And I've seen that a lot more recently with companies like Coursera and Udacity starting to recognize that just because they have courses from the top US universities, that alone will not sort of help them succeed in the Indian market, because as much as brand is important for the Indian audience, the knowledge that they are gaining needs to be equally impactful and relevant. And what we realized is that in some of these programs, the course materials pretty much focus on case studies that are North American or European, and the companies that these professionals in India work for they're probably 5 to 7 years behind in terms of facing the same sort of challenges. So our portfolio company that basically targets professional education for people in sort of the 25 to 35 age group has taken advantage of that. And what we do is that we work specifically with Indian Ivy League universities and institutions to bring the same sort of program. So if you're a digital marketing professional, you can earn a certificate from one of the top digital marketing schools in India, but the case studies that we would talk about would be very relevant to, for example, how do you get customers to pay, paid customers acquisition from tier 3 or tier 4 towns of India. So I think that having a global brand helps some of these larger companies, but some level of localization actually is really required for them to succeed.
So for the, we're shifting gears to now just compare and contrast trends that you're observing in EdTech businesses. So I think just going around the group, sort of the top 1 or 2 trends that you're seeing that are exciting and innovations in the space.
Sure. I'd go ahead. So we're seeing a lot of personalization in sort of learning becoming a big theme, especially for India. So India historically has had institutions where the teacher teaches to the top layer of a class and doesn't really bother about the bottom sort of 15, 20%, or even the medium, right? And especially with digital education sort of becoming mainstream, we're now able to run a lot of analytics on the student and their behavior. So if you were on a platform delivering a lecture, the analytics is now allowing you to see what exactly 60 of those students are doing and how many of them are engaging with the content, how many of them are actually going in and reading the course material. And so all this personalization and the data that's now available is empowering the educators and the teachers to be able to figure out the level of the class very quickly. So we've had courses for multiple sort of streams where we're able to very quickly within lectures 2 or 3 understand this is the level at which I need to sort of target my lecture, the next lecture, and then go from there. And also with the individual learning paths that are now being built on technology, students who are not able to keep up or students who are ahead of the class can actually go beyond and be able to dive into the topics and get more detail if they wanted to, or the ones that are lagging behind can actually get extra help. So personalization, data are, I think, the biggest themes that are emerging, especially in the emerging geographies.
I'm going to agree with the data analytics points. I mean, I think there's been a lot of talk about AI in all sorts of industries for a long time. But I think we are genuinely now beginning to see proper data analytics driving product delivery in education. And it's still early days. I think there's still more talk about it than there is fundamental reality, but I think we're beginning to see that. But I think the thing that also that connects into is that I'm seeing increasing focus on outcomes and effectiveness. And this is a big thing for us anyway. We want to evidence the impact that we have. But we're seeing an increasing number of organizations that are supplying into the education space, wanting to be able to understand the impact they're having, not necessarily because it makes their sales job easier or a retention job easier, but it allows them to develop fundamentally effective products and services that are going to have a long-term value play.
Yeah, so actually just playing off of both of those themes that were brought up, so we have a couple of themes that we talk about quite a bit or have talked about in the past year that we think are going to continue to develop in this year and beyond. So the first is what we call the rise of real R&D. In education technology. So what we're noticing a lot of companies around the world, what we're noticing a lot of them doing right now is partnering with professors at university who have actually been focused their entire careers on what that education technology company does, right? And these professors absolutely love it because now all of a sudden they have access to these amazing data sets that allow them to drive new meaning, which can then create much, much more product innovation. Right? In the past, most of the kind of like research partnerships that we saw were basically around producing efficacy studies, right? Which is very different from being able to use data for product innovation. And so that I think is a really big trend right now. And just to give you a very clear example of that, so one of our most recent investments was in a company called VIPKid, based out of China, which is now growing by leaps and bounds. And VIPKid actually just recently created a separate research institute. So partnering with professors at Harvard, Stanford, and USC in Los Angeles, where they're actually going to be able to use the kinds of data that they're collecting to be able to drive product innovation to make sure that they can maximize the amount of kind of time that is given between teacher and learner. The other big trend that we notice is actually based kind of off of outcomes-driven education. It's really the connection between education and employment. I think now more than ever, the connection between education and employment is really, really strong. So Learn Capital. Sorry. Okay.
You personally have been named.
I'm personally 15 minutes over. Right. So just to finish up this thought really quickly. We're really big investors in the boot camp model, and we're noticing a lot more boot camps employ income share agreements where you'll pay no tuition when you're in the boot camp itself, and you'll only pay tuition once you actually get employed and pay a cut of your salary back to the boot camp. So I think those are the two big trends that we're seeing right now, which actually play pretty well off of the trends that you guys were talking about.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, and especially my fellow panelists here for contributing all your ideas and experiences. I believe we're all available, I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, to talk directly to the audience, and then our information, I'm sure, is available on the app. So just reach out to us individually, happy to answer any questions, and then we'd love to just hear more about your experiences in the sector.